But strangely enough, there is left in the world today an area as big as the United States
that's never been seen by a human being.
The best is yet to come.
Look at history textbooks that were used in schools. You'll see that history is different. It's been rewritten. It doesn't match up.
Houston, we have a call.
We destroyed that technology.
People should not be walking around with masks.
That stuff is flat.
There's your flu
Last year.
Here's your flu
This year.
Literally doesn't
All right,
even
ladies and
exist.
gentlemen, welcome back to the Hibbeler Effect. And today we have the greatest doctor in this movement, in the truth community, in terms of whistleblowing and telling it like it is and keeping it real, not caring about your feelings in the process. That's why I love this man. You love this man. Welcome to the show, Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Thank you for coming on the Hibbeler Effect.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for that nice intro.
Yeah, of course, man. Look, I mean, we all talk about you all the time. I mean, your name's brought up. I try to bring your name up anytime the topic of, I know we're on YouTube right now, but you know, the topic of these or the topic of the flu the last couple of years, when that's brought up, I go, you got to go listen to Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Go watch Terrain. There's things out there that are verified now that this whole thing was a psyop. And again, trying to keep it clean on here the first 20 minutes, but what I wanted to get into, I think it's clean enough, is I was thrown back when you were on Eddie's show and you were talking about the human fall, right? Where human beings have their fall like the trees, right? Where you through. Yeah, go ahead. I want you to explain that to my audience that says, well, I get sick every year. What's that? Well, what's happening? It's got to be a virus, right?
It's funny, when you first said that, I thought you meant like the fall of humanity.
Well, it's kind of both, but to simplify it, I guess the question's more about our flu season as humans.
Yeah. Well, this is, kind of what I theorize from my observations, and this is really based in the truth, right, that we are part of nature. And there's a principle in reasoning called the principle of correspondence, right? Where when you see patterns in nature, normally these can exist on different scales, right? On the micro and the macro scale, right? Just like the model of the atom looks like the model of the solar system, even if those aren't proven models, right? You see one is tiny and one is big. So we look at nature, and nature has cycles. Now, we know even our bodies are part of this, right? We have our sleep and wake cycle, for example, right? Our hormones also have different cycles, right? Like our cortisol peaks in the early hours of the morning, right? Giving rise to the dawn effect of our blood sugar, for example. We also can burn glycogen when we wake up in the morning. We're drowsy at night. And then out in nature, of course, we have the seasonal patterns, right? And all of the flora and fauna of nature observe those patterns. We also have, of course, the moon and the sun cycles, right? And of course, the astrological cycles, right? The different constellations, et cetera, right? So this is in every aspect of nature, both living and the material, non-living elements of the world. So when we look at illness, we also see seasonal cyclic patterns. And the cold and flu season, right, which we call the cold and flu season for a reason, because it occurs, right, predictably at a certain time of the year, is something that is a normal seasonal pattern of nature, just like the leaves falling off the trees. So we see, for example, right, just a little bit before cold and flu season strike usually is when the leaves start turning colors and then falling off, right? We call it the fall, another word for autumn, based on this observation. Now, if you go into the forest where this happens, right, if you live in far north enough, you'll see that, one tree after another, and in fact, there's waves of it, right? Different species of trees, one after the other, the aspens, the maples, etc. And we can observe this pattern every time. Now, we never, look at that and say, oh my gosh, there must be a virus spreading around causing all those leaves to fall off, right? We know that this happens because of the change in the weather due to the pattern of the sun, right? The cyclical pattern of the sun, where it gets further away and the days get colder. And interestingly, just like the airway in our bodies, right? The nose, mouth, throat, and lungs, right? Where the gas exchange occurs. The leaves of the trees is also in the plants, that in the trees, that's where the gas exchange occurs for them. So it's like their respiratory system. And on the bottom of their leaves, there are little holes called stoma or stomata. And that's where the CO2, their food, right, comes in the form of air. And the sun shines there and it helps, convert that into sugar. And this is right how plants grow and breathe. So their respiratory organ essentially falls off, right, in this part of the year because all of the pollutants in the air, right, which some may be natural, like just dust particles and things like that from the soil, but also the industrial ones, they gum up those little holes in the leaves. Right, and essentially make it harder for the leaf to function over time. So when it sheds the leaves, it's kind of like an air filter change, and it'll go dormant right through the winter, and then the new leaves will grow and they'll have brand new respiratory organs on them, so it'll be able to maximize its intake of the right, gases from the air. So now compare this to what happens when we enter cold and flu season. Well, it predictably occurs when the temperature and humidity drop in the late fall, early winter. And this has been shown with data. It's actually extremely well correlated to drops in humidity specifically. So there's a seasonal cue that sets off this pattern, right? And then we see, not just men and women in our area near us, but like all over, the country kind of start to get sick. And you can look at the national data, you can look at it internationally in other countries. It follows this pattern pretty much everywhere. And what we're having our respiratory organs be affected, right? And what are they doing? They're purging. So we have the production of mucus, and which sloughs, there's basically damaged tissue, right, from all the stuff in the air all year round, because our nose and throat and the rest of our airway is filtering out that air, so just leaving, the oxygen for our body. And, in studies where they actually measure your breath outward, right, they can find hundreds of chemicals, poisonous chemicals, right, industrial ones, etc., that your body has filtered out in the airway, and now it's getting rid of out of your body. So if you are exposed to a lot of these things and you don't clean out this filter proactively, right, once a year or perhaps even more, your body is going to initiate this filter change, right? And what's it going to do? It's going to essentially wash it by secreting all this stuff that's going to irrigate and get rid of all the particles that are built up on there, right? Just like you would do with your home heating filter or your cabin filter in your car or the dehumidifier filter that you got to clean out. Otherwise, it gets gummed up and stops working. So everything kind of about these two phenomenon really kind of matches up and serves a clear restorative purpose in the natural cycles. And we don't need to invent imaginary microscopic bugs to explain anything.
Yeah. So that's a beautiful explanation. I could never explain it like that. What I take from that to my audience is pretty much, I could be wrong, but no matter who you are, no matter how healthy you are, it's generally natural that once a year you're going to have some sort of fall, some sort of cleansing, right? And I think what the mainstream media and the powers that be, they know what time it is. They know exactly what's coming, the flu season or whatever you want to call it, where all human beings are going to be breaking down in their system and feeling bad. So that's why it was right around that same time that they said there's a new virus in China. and they knew that people were going to be getting this illness no matter what, who, when, or where. You're going to have a sickness. And I think because of the human brain, not only the mainstream media brainwashing them, trying to brainwash all of us. It didn't work for a lot of people, but they tried their hardest to get you scared beforehand. And then once you felt a little ill, which you were going to feel ill without the news that day. Okay. It's a normal thing every year. But what happens is when it's tied in mentally to what they're telling you on the TV, now you become a mental midget in the sense where you feel something, even some phlegm, and you're like, oh my God, I have COVID. Oh my God, I got to put a bubble around me, because you're paying attention to this narrative. When if you never had a TV, if you were an Amish family and you never had a TV, you still would have had your flu that day, but you would have moved on the next day. There'd be no bubbles. There'd be no doctor visits. It'd be just like old times where someone brings you soup. But as we see in the last 3 or 4 years, no one's bringing anybody soup in terms of normal society. They don't even want to deliver it. They just want to stay away from grandma and stay away from mom and dad. And as you could tell, obviously, you're one to, I'm preaching to the choir, but this was an entire psyop that they hijacked, in my opinion, at the same time as the flu season, no? Because it was right around November, right, when they started mentioning China virus, and then right through December and January is what kind of went all in. Is that a coincidence, Doc, or is that them planning their attack at the right time?
Well, I think, first of all, you can look back further than this example and find many, many times when essentially diseases were renamed, relabeled, or separated into new categories in order to serve some other purpose, right? That it had nothing to do with observing what's occurring in nature and saying, oh my God, something has changed in nature. Right, it's quite different. And of course, you can actually find evidence of various meetings, because the public health officials for many years, right, were unhappy that people didn't take the flu very seriously, right? They didn't take flu shots, not only because they actually don't work, but also because they said, oh, the flu's not that serious. What do I need, to go out of my way for? It's just a bad cold, right? That's most people's understanding of the flu, is just it's a bad cold. So they, had this problem. They wanted to give widespread immunization, but people didn't take it seriously. So by creating a psychological operation and exploiting this, of course, you could have a lot different outcome. And they did clearly, obviously relabel the flu during those couple of years, because the number of flu cases in the records just disappeared practically, and so it's kind of obvious. But interestingly, it wasn't just the flu that they relabeled.
Yeah, car accidents, cancer, you name it.
Exactly, heart disease, many other things. They didn't completely disappear as much as the flu did, but they, cancer and heart disease dropped considerably. Right now, if you believed everything and just looked at that, maybe you would say this is a good thing. It's saving people from heart attacks. Right.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some folks out there that felt that way.
COVID is cardioprotective. So and of course they use statistical models, computer models, not real actual evidence to try to drive home some of the points in this operation. But we can see, it was very convenient to already have those numbers and then use fear, changing hospital protocols, things like that, to enhance the severity and mortality, essentially kill people with experimental poison drugs or euthanasia, but make it look like there's a new disease and you're trying to save their life.
Yep. Well, to me, they were successful in a sense. Now, hear me out. They were successful in a sense because you know, we all witnessed it. We all witness, whether it's our peers, our family, our friends, acquaintances, enemies. I hope you don't have any, but we all witness people during those first, especially that first 6-month period, just freak out. They had no clue what to do. They had no idea who to listen to. There weren't that many people like us in the beginning stages speaking out. If they were, it was not, I wouldn't say even more censored than now. I think even now is worse, but it wasn't being put out there and it wasn't being taken seriously. I'm sure you, like me, in the beginning stages were screaming at people that this is a psychological operation. I think I sniffed it out from day one. I'm sure you did. I'm sure many of us did, what they were going to do. I mean, Event 201 is a prime example of them planning something. And not only that, but, you know, in Floyd-19, which I want to thank you for letting me feature you in. But in Floyd-19, I put that part of Fauci in, I believe, 2018 or early 2019, when he was up there speaking about influenza. And he was saying that the American people are not scared of influenza, and they have to do a better job. This is Fauci talking.
This is something that is 10 years in the making. If it works perfectly, it's going to take a decade. And that's where the federal government comes in.
Well, yeah,
No, seriously.
with all your money.
No, seriously. Are you afraid of the flu? Don't bother me. I mean, that's the reality of how people perceive flu. So we really do have a problem of how the world perceives influenza, and it's going to be very difficult to change that unless you do it from within and say, I don't care what your perception is, we're going to address the problem in a disruptive way and in an iterative way, because you do need both.
They have to do a better job of basically scaring us that influenza is bad. So they're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that they shove it down our throat, and which is what they did. Coronavirus is a flu. They didn't want to call it influenza. They knew they had no credit with them. A new influenza. Oh, turn the TV off. Boring. So coronavirus. Ooh, what's this? Even though most people, I don't know why. It's like they never heard of it before. It's like, I heard of coronavirus. It's the flu. But I think what happened, Doc, I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. But in my opinion, I saw even the masses, even the one that you know, they go out to buy their face mask on week 1. When they were looking at this from a different perspective, they were looking at it from, you know, kind of like, hey, well, coronavirus isn't that big of a deal because of, I saw this everywhere. And these are from people that are not awakened souls, in my opinion. They were posting photos of the Lysol bottle. Now, these weren't just truthers doing it, or whoever you want to call it, truth seekers. It was normal people in society that were like, well, you know, come over to my house. I'm having a barbecue. I'm just going to spray my house with Lysol, kills coronavirus. So I think what happened was mainstream, the powers that be, whatever you want to call it, they saw that and go, oh shit, this could backfire. We did all this to get to this point. No more. Don't say coronavirus again. We're going to call it COVID-19 from now on. We're going to remarket, reprogram, rebrainwash. Even though COVID-19 was already in the works, they already had this name and this plan. I'm not saying it was a new sporadic thing, but they stopped calling it coronavirus. It was like one day the media just said no more, and they went full COVID-19. Now, is that a coincidence to you, or is that something that maybe I am right, where it did backfire? In my opinion, it backfired where people weren't really that scared of a coronavirus. So they had to come in with something new, call it COVID-19.
Yeah, well, I mean, they also, remember, compared it to SARS, right, which was supposedly quite serious. So, you know, it could very well have been the case. I mean, there are other times, right, where the name of something was changed and such. And, you know, it's kind of interesting that it was chosen to be a coronavirus particularly, too, which is, you know, not the only virus that's alleged to cause, you know, alleged virus alleged to cause colds, but that it refers to the crown, right, the corona. And so as if, and then, you know, now we have King Charles. So is there a connection there, you know, with the royalty of some sort that was being hinted on by that terminology?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the crown, because a lot of people look past and I'm not trying to put you in a corner to agree or disagree, but a lot of people look past Kobe Bryant and what that represented. Now, some people could say that was a random accident. I get it, and I'm not against those people that think that, but you know, he was all about that Corona tattoo. Okay, the crown. It's a Corona crown. They shoved it in for me, it was a form of soft disclosure of what's coming. The crown is dead. The king, you know, it's like, and they always showed the crown tattoo. It was like this crown tattoo. People were holding signs of the crown tattoo. It's like Kobe. And then what happened in between there? George Floyd, they wanted everybody angry. And then boom, they got everybody by the balls now for this complete attack on humanity. So I look at it from this perspective, man. And before we get over to Rockfin to get even more uncensored, because I might have to bleep a few things out of this YouTube version. So sorry in advance, guys, if you're watching and you hear censored beeps. I want to stay on YouTube, so I'm sorry. But let me ask you this. This is what we'll end with on the YouTube version, because it's very hard to bounce around terminologies. But for my audience, you know, they say that this COVID, what is it? The COVID virus or the COVID, whatever it's called. They say that there's a virus out there that there's a wave in China and it's spreading through the world, and stay in your house. That's not even possible. And I don't even see how people think it's possible, that whether it's they think the theory of a lab leak, like some evil scientist is like, oh man, something leaked. And now the government and Bill Gates and all these pre-planned propaganda pieces that they already knew this was coming, they have to sit there and wait for it to spread naturally, even though that's impossible. But it's just a point. They have to wait for it to spread naturally and hope that everybody's fucked. That doesn't make any sense to me. So for me, I rule that out completely, that there's some lab leak. And obviously, yeah, I mean, it's hilarious that it came from a bat to begin with. That's been squashed. You can't find it in nature. You can't isolate something. You have to isolate it in nature and then say, look what we have. And then we go from there. That's never happened, guys. So they're just basically saying there's a new thing, you might have it, go get tested with a flu test. It's a whole psyop piece that they want you to just blindly believe. But when you put the pieces together of this puzzle, it's so obvious that every single piece of this agenda was planned, predetermined, and executed with your life, the human public, not in mind. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, let me also just kind of back up that even if there was some lab created entity that spread around and made people sick, well, we'd be able to find it, right? Because it would actually be something that exists in a material sense in the world, right? It's a particle, an infectious particle or capsule, or you know, tiny little ball or whatever. It's not a magic spell, right? Or a lightsaber or anything like that. It's an actual physical thing. So, you know, really what I'm saying is that there's no evidence of any physical things, natural or man-made, that have made us sick. And in fact, even without going to that step, right? Because you mentioned, right, that it would there would have to be a pattern of it spreading from person to person, like contagion. Well, contagion has been well studied scientifically, and it's been shown not to exist in every experiment, right? It's essentially a dead theory. It's been completely disproven using the actual scientific method. And if you look at the Spanish flu, for example, which, you know, is said to spread. Now, there are several experiments done in humans and in animals with the Spanish flu patients showing that there's no contagion whatsoever, but also because you talked about it internationally. Now, at that time, right, in 1918, there was no widespread aviation, right? People didn't go on an airplane to China all the time, right? Now, there were airplanes, but they weren't widely available. You know, most people, if they traveled internationally, they had to go on a ship, right? Which took quite a bit of time. So the timing of when people got the Spanish flu in different locations, there was no possible way they could have traveled from one place to the next at that time and made someone else sick there, right? So you could look at that data also, I'm sure, for, COVID and find the same thing, that it's actually impossible. Just follow their guidelines of what they say, how long it takes.
Yeah, and I think it's 2023 now. We're heading into 2024. I think by this point, if this is something that you realize, you're never going to get it. I mean, I've never seen such a constructed psyop in my life, man. I mean, there's, and we're going to go over Rockfin soon, so maybe we could talk about some other psyops in the world, but this one was well constructed. It just, I feel like they did a lazy job in terms of like, when you see it all, you're like, wait, that's kind of lazy. They did a lazy way to do this, and they didn't prove anything. They didn't isolate anything. They didn't need to. They didn't need to, because they had celebrities and politicians, and they had so many people well packaged, ready to go to say, I mean, look at Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks was like week 1. Now, of course, who are we going to put in the limelight? We better put him before his reputation's ruined soon. So put him out there. Look, I have COVID. Just get your, I'm just really sick right now. It's like, come on. It was so obvious. I go, Tom Hanks is first. Oh my gosh. So for me, it was.
Well, you're right, Sean. I mean, because most people around the world, they haven't looked into anything whatsoever. They just, got their information from the TV, the pop culture celebrities, and didn't look further. Right. And they kind of dismiss folks like us as heretical.
And censored, and made sure that the voices weren't even heard. I mean, if that's not a red flag to, again, you could be sitting there being like, well, I believe Dr. Fauci. I believe the president. I believe all these health experts on television. Why would they lie to everybody? It's like, granted, that's how you've been brainwashed your whole life to think that these people are not lying to you, but how many times have they been caught in a lie? It's like, for me, one time, like NASA, you got one glitch or one harness. Like, well, you have a harness in the ISS. Okay, I'm writing that up. Now, you don't have to write off all NASA, but you definitely have to write off the ISS at that point and then go from there, right? It's the same thing. Once I start seeing Tom Hanks and just the Obamas, like, and then especially when the, again, we can't really get into this, but when the came into play, it was hardcore attack, mainstream commercials, infomercials, advertising, promoting, which is illegal to do, by the way, and they just fucking did it. So and I did wake some people up just based on that. Like, look at the red flags here. Look at all this propaganda and think, when's the last time you heard of this type of propaganda for an immunization? Well, who would care about that? That's a personal thing. You're not even supposed to really tell people if you're immunized. That's private. It's supposed to be private. Just like your Republican, Democrat, who you voted for, that's supposed to be private. They want that out. They want to diversify everybody so they know who's who and who's doing what and what they can do to drive their agenda. But I have so many things I want to say, and I'm biting my lips. So thank you for joining us on the Hibbeler Effect YouTube edition. Please head over to Rockfin right now. Thank you, Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Let's head over there now. See you there.